Dr. Edwin Vieira, before we get into the Supreme Court and what's happening there, you were on hold listening to that MP officer talking about suddenly they're being trained about the different types of martial law. What's that sound like to you?
Well, this goes back a fair ways, Alex, of course, because they've been anticipating for a long time, based on what they understand to be the inherent instability of this monetary and banking system, that we're going to be in for a great deal of economic chaos, if you will, not simply crisis, but chaos, and that will obviously lead to social dislocations, political unrest. I mean, imagine things like the Watts riots or the Los Angeles riots. Most people are familiar with that in recent history, or what happened in Argentina is a good example at the turn of the 20th century, and they'd had a couple of events like that earlier. I think that's what the powers that be are looking towards, and they probably don't believe, I certainly don't believe, that they're capable of finessing the difficulties they're having with the Federal Reserve, the currency, and the debt level of the federal government, so forth and so on. So they're anticipating this will happen. They know that they don't have enough, as the expression goes, boots on the ground within the local and state police forces, so this means they have to turn to the National Guard and the regular Army to try and maintain their version of social order. And that's where the whole concept of martial law comes in, and of course the training that follows from that.
And of course your deep research and papers and books you've written on it have been seminal roadmaps. Ron Paul has quoted them as seminal roadmaps in his research, that if they wanted real homeland security, it would spring from the state and the county and would be the bona fide militia of 1789.
Well, if you go to the Constitution and you look for the word security, where do you find it? The only place it exists is in the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. And it's not just security for security's sake. It's security for this concept called a free state, which is what the entire Constitution is intended to uphold. And that's certainly not what most people today, or myself, would call a martial law. It's something entirely different. And it's tied to this institution called a well-regulated militia. And if you want to know what that is, you put yourself back in the context of the Founding Fathers, most of whom, if they were the Founding Fathers by definition being males, most of whom had served or were then members of various state militias that traced back their history into the 1600s. You can find all of the principles for the organization of a well-regulated militia in just hundreds of these statutes that were passed in the 13 colonies and then independent states prior to the ratification of the Constitution.
And to interrupt, the Democrats especially, but also Republicans argue, no, that means well-regulated military, but it says the people. I mean, there in the Second Amendment, it says the people, the rights of the people. I mean, clearly, it's 100% defined as this militia for our security is the people. And of course, if everybody's got guns and knows how to use them, most people aren't criminals, you're going to have a very free and safe society and a polite society.
And of course, the Second Amendment, in a sense, is redundant there, because if you look at these militia statutes, which define what those people considered to be a well-regulated militia, what do those militias consist of? Well, at the time, it was every able-bodied free man from 16 to 55 or 60 when you became too old to function anymore. Now, of course, they had slaves, and the women were not legally emancipated, so it was limited at that time to men. We might have a slight change in that composition. But the idea was it was the organization of the entire community. We're supposed to have a self-governing republic in each one of the states, Republican form of government, and a self-governing community involves everyone participating to some degree, literally having a duty to participate in the governmental structure. And as the Constitution tells us in the Second Amendment, the key element to maintaining this free state, this Republican form of government, is what? A well-regulated militia, which consists of whom? The people. So this whole idea that the National Guard is the militia or somehow the Army or whatever, I mean, all you have to do is read the Constitution and see that the provisions dealing with the Army and the Navy are separate from the provisions dealing with the militia. They're two different entities.
They know exactly what they're doing. Now let's shift gears, sir, and pick your powerful brain on these issues. One of the leading constitutional scholars out there, Dr. Edwin Vieira, joins us right now if you just tuned in. I want to get your take on the overall atmosphere, if you're shocked by it, because I was expecting this, but still, it's one thing to know it's coming, but to see it happen, the Violent Belligerence Act that clearly states, in the text, we've shown it here probably 100 times the last 2 months, it's very close to passing, where it says if the Army or the Justice Department wants you, you disappear for even any intelligence purpose, and only an act of Congress can even discover where you are. You've got Cass Sunstein saying we can shut down free speech, tax free speech, make people carry what information we want in their newspapers or websites. You've got Elena Kagan, and I've got the quotes, basically saying we can ban any speech we want, we can go after the Second Amendment. I mean, these people, they're running around saying we'll put you on a secret list with no fly, no buy, you can't own guns. They've got Republicans supporting that. The end of habeas corpus. I mean, it's just the Supreme Court just ruled, no rights for detainees, indefinite detention. I mean, it's just, for me, as a layman, but somebody who studied the Bill of Rights, Constitution, and history, is this not the most Orwellian system we could imagine?
I think Stalinist is actually the word for it. I suppose it's Orwellian in the sense that Orwell wrote fiction, and we're looking at something which is so extraordinarily difficult to believe that it could even happen at all, let alone that it's happening so quickly. If you look at the rise of the police state mechanism, 9/11, the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, and now there's various things that you're talking about. Well, how long has this been? Right? A decade? How quickly has this country degenerated? And the amazing thing to me is the uniformity of opinion among Democrats, Republicans, in the court system, in the media. The orchestration of this is what really, I shouldn't say shocks me, but it just surprises me how well the wheels have been greased to move this forward at a very rapid speed, much faster than I certainly would have predicted. But I think it's primarily because the economic system is deteriorating much faster than most of us would have predicted.
Well said. I mean, when I really lay in bed and I'm thinking about this, I ask myself, how do I hear a UT law professor saying the health care bill's constitutional on local radio, and out of his mouth next he says stripping us of habeas corpus is good, and the guy was supposedly a liberal. I mean, this guy isn't a liberal. He's not a conservative. He's a tyrant. He's a danger to us all.
Yeah, and it's the consistency among these people on both sides of the so-called political spectrum, once again proving that the political spectrum that they present to us is essentially fictional. It's there for another purpose. It doesn't really represent a dichotomy in the views of the people on that side of the yellow line, if you will. They all have essentially the same view, which, to use, I think the correct word, is basically totalitarian. They're going to tell us what to do, and to hell with us, basically. They don't intend to listen to us. We are supposed to listen to them. And everything that's coming out now, it's amazing that Cass Sunstein is a good example. It's coming out of Harvard Law School, because I attended Harvard, and it was a pretty liberal place even in my day. And it's become quite a bit more liberal since then. That was back in the 1970s. And here's a professor at Harvard Law School who is blatantly promoting the suppression of political speech. It was incredible.
And broad. He didn't just pick out the Nazis to set the precedent. He said, arrest someone if they say anthropogenic global warming is a fraud.
That's right. So how far does this go? Well, it goes to the Stalinist point that if you say essentially anything that's against the regime, the NKVD will show up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you'll disappear into the gulag.
And now I turn CNN on, and they've got Lieberman and McCain going, we want to be able to secretly arrest you.
And strip you of your citizenship.
Yes.
All right, let's take that next step, right? Strip you of your citizenship. So that now, theoretically, all sorts of rights disappear simply as a consequence of that. Now, of course, if people want to be stripped of citizenship, and I think that's unconstitutional as a principle, but if you were to accept that principle, it would strike me that the first people on that list would be these public officials who have violated their oath to the Constitution of the United States.
Well, they do. I mean, they do work for the foreign powers of the banking cartel. Dr. Edwin Vieira, our amazing guest, will be right back after this quick break to continue and talk about Elena Kagan. Dr. Edwin Vieira is with us for the rest of the hour. Elena Kagan, I mean, what is this psychological tactic where they just throw everything in our face? Are they trying to break our will, doctor? Because here she is, never even been a judge. They admit...
a lawyer. She was never a litigator, for instance, so she's had very little experience in the court system.
But then the papers we do have from the University of Chicago Law Review and others, I mean, this is Stalinistic. She's a chip off the old Cass Sunstein block. Give us your breakdown on Elena Kagan.
Well, I think that's exactly it. There's a certain mentality there that's expressed in what she's written. The interesting little vignette that came to me, she was a law clerk at the Supreme Court for Justice Blackmun, and the case came up involving some Second Amendment question. And she wrote a little memo to him saying that the case certiorari shouldn't be granted, and the case Supreme Court shouldn't hear it, because she was not sympathetic to the issue. And I thought, well, that's an amazing attitude. Whether or not an individual law clerk or a justice is personally sympathetic to a constitutional question, decides whether these questions are going to be heard, well, that would strike me as really a disqualification in terms of their psychological propensities, if you will, for dealing with this type of problem. But then you look at the background, you look at what she's advocated, at least what she's in print as having advocated.